Welcome to the Zayari Wellness Podcast, where we learn about other people's journeys. Regardless of age, race, religion, or status, we're all just human and have one thing in common: the ups and downs of life. Join me in welcoming our special guest, Kate, as we explore the subtleties of domestic violence and how people end up in toxic relationships.
Hi, I'm Kate, Kate Majot, she, her, and I am a therapist and an author, and I'm a domestic violence survivor. And so I am super passionate about working with domestic violence survivors, and that's a lot of what I do. Also, side note, a lot of what I do is working with ADHD and autistic people. That's also part of my passion. I'm also ADHD. So I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah, we're excited to have you, and I find that um, your niche is very unique. There's not a lot of people who would say like, "Hey, I'm a therapist," and like self-disclose about like, this is what I've been through and this is my life. Because of the cliches in the therapy space that you're not supposed to be human and you're not supposed to share your humanity. So kudos and props. I don't believe that you shouldn't share your humanity. I think it makes you more relatable. So, thank you for sharing that with us. And actually, today's podcast, we're not speaking to you as a therapist, are we?
Well, I mean, it's hard to take me out of being a therapist, so I'll do my best.
Yeah, for sure. But, on the topic of domestic violence, right? Like, what made you so passionate about that topic, and like what led you to want to be on the podcast and speak about it?
Yeah, so I was in an abusive marriage, and when I got out of it, well, even like in the process of getting out of it, I didn't even really know what domestic violence was. Like,
Mm,
I had all these misconceptions of like, well, it wasn't that bad, and like, I don't know, I feel fine, and
mhm,
maybe I'm supposed to stay in the marriage for him because I agreed to marry him. There's just so much of like, what is it? And a friend convinced me to call the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and they
mm,
validated that that's what it was. And like, I was able to take such a deep breath after that moment, and they pointed me to a bunch of resources, one of them being New Beginnings, a domestic violence advocacy agency in Seattle.
mm.
And I did support groups with them and learned about it. And my mind was so blown open, like, oh my gosh, this is a thing that happens. And then
Mhm.
looking at the statistics, it's like 1 in 3 women, a little over more than 1 in 2 trans people. Like, it literally affects all of us. So,
Mhm.
yeah, that's how I got involved with this. Yes.
Yeah. And well, I appreciate you sharing that. So, were you a therapist then, or were you not a therapist?
I was not. No, my
Mhm.
bachelor's was in psychology, and then I just did like a bunch of other jobs and degrees. And yeah, I did all the psychoeducation groups learning about it. And then I had a therapist for several years processing it. I wrote my memoir on it. And then it's an educational memoir, by the way. It like
Mhm.
it tells the story. And then after each chapter, it explains the domestic violence that was happening.
Mm.
Um, and then I was obviously emotionally struggling, even with all those supports, and could not hack it at my job anymore. And so that
Mhm.
ended, and I went on a little self exploration and did a bunch of things. And then I tried to figure out what do I want to do, and that led me to graduate school, being a
Yeah.
therapist.
That's awesome. Not awesome that you went through domestic violence, but
But
that that it led you here, right? There's not a lot of people that choose to do therapy or be therapists and actually like go the other route. I'm like, I hate people. I don't want to work with people. I was one of those, by the way, for a while, if I'm honest.
yeah,
Um, so I kind of want to use this as an educational moment, perhaps, like maybe for the audience, because when we talk about domestic violence, like that word is, I think, a little bit cliche because when
Mhm.
you're in it, you don't know what's happening, and there's so much that happens beforehand that is
Mhm.
very subtle that you don't really catch. And I say this because I also, my first marriage was also,
Mhm.
um, had domestic violence. And when I was in it, I'm like, this is, I'm fine. We're just a little bit heated sometimes. We just have like some arguments and the roller coaster of like, oh, we're good, we're not, but I love them and I made a commitment, just like you said, right? So,
Yeah.
what bring us back, take it back a little bit in your story. And can you explain a little bit about perhaps when you were dating and things that you didn't catch then that now is like, hey, this is kind of like a pointer, a red flag maybe?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, red flag or warning signs. So I'm like, okay, where to begin? Okay, so first I want to just clarify domestic violence is the umbrella term that includes intimate partner violence and family violence. And then, so technically, I was in intimate partner violence, which is a selection of domestic violence. And
What
then
is
I
that?
also, sorry,
What
what
is
is
intimate partner violence? Like, if you can define it so everybody can know what you're talking
yeah.
about.
So, it's any type of violence that is occurring between one or more partners, as there's, different arrangements and relationships. And it is emotional, sexual, financial, like using children, psychological. Actually, a really great way to look at all the different aspects is you can Google the domestic violence power and control wheel, and you can see
Mhm.
all the different types and see what fits under that. And
Mhm.
also, there is the domestic violence equality wheel, or it's yeah, I think it's called equality, but it's the good version of it. So it's its mirror, and you can see all of the positive ways that a relationship can look. And for someone wondering if they're in it or someone's in it, you can compare and contrast those two wheels.
So it's not just physical, because I think a lot of people's mind goes straight to physical, right? Like, oh, they're not beating on me. They're not like, I don't have black eyes. I don't, and that's more evident. That's more overt. But I think what you're describing, the other areas are more covert. People don't really recognize them.
They are covert, and when the emotional and psychological violences are occurring, especially they happen in such a way to like manipulate a person and to lower a person's self-esteem, and it's all done to give the power to the abuser, right? So another way to know if it is domestic violence or not is to look at, is there equal balance of power? So if one person has more power than the other person, that's where you want to watch out. And so as that person is using these emotional and psychological abuse tactics, it's like bringing a person's self-esteem down and making a person more dependent on that person so they will not leave the abuser.
Hmm.
So that also answers like why people don't know about it. Sorry, there are sirens in my neighborhood.
You're okay. I think it's appropriate for the subject we're talking about. So, it's all
Yeah,
good.
there's just a fire station nearby. It is what it is. So anyways, sorry. Yeah, so if you're having this happen to you, then you're having less of a sense of confidence and self-esteem to like think about what you actually deserve and how you deserve to be treated as this is happening. And you are having a sense of like needing them, and so not wanting to leave and like not even wanting to look and think about how this is happening. And a lot of times there's this like comes with this manipulation to secrecy, like, oh, a marriage is between two partners or however many
Hmm.
partners are in your marriage, but don't talk about this with your family and friends. And like that's literally the only way that I figured out what the heck was happening.
Hmm. Yeah. So let's talk about the little subtleties of that, right? Because it's so easy to get caught up, and most people think that people who are like, for the lack of a better word, the abusers, right? That they're just overtly aggressive. That people, that they're just one of these people that, oh, you can see it, right? But I would like to challenge the thought, right? Because they're kind of like really charming, and they're people that like know how to like feed you the sweet nothings and kind of like stroke your ego when they need to and give you just enough for you to stay in the relationship. So can you elaborate a little bit about that and how it maybe played out in your life or how it could play out?
Yeah. So some of the things that you're describing would fall under love bombing. So like ways of giving like tons of extra admiration. And you can think of that in any of the like five love languages. Like any way a person shows love can be done in love bombing. Um, in my case, there wasn't as much of it, like a little bit love bombing with quality time, which kind of started this like feeling of codependency, which then later became dependency. But a lot of where, like looking back and analyzing, it was that he was incredibly selfish and like did not think about me or did not like help out in doing anything. Um, and then it was also just signs in the ways that he talked about other people.
Hmm.
So that was really
Mhm.
what happened towards the beginning. And then I would say more like a few years into it, it was a lot of moving the goalpost. So that would be like, for the example of Charlie Brown and Sally from Peanuts, and Sally's like moving the football away every time Charlie Brown is trying to, or maybe it's Lucy. Sorry, I don't know.
Mhm.
I think it's Lucy. But, anyways, she's moving the football away, and Charlie Brown cannot get to it. And that
Mhm.
is something that happens in domestic violence as part of psychological abuse, is that like whatever that person is doing to make the other person happy is never going to be good enough. It always
Mhm.
has to be that much better. And
Mhm.
so you can never attain it.
And
So I was trying.
I would like to emphasize on that too. And I'm sorry,
Oh,
um,
no.
because some people do that unintentionally, and I just want to clarify that some people may not even know what they like to feel loved or what they need to feel loved, right? And so it's like, oh, it looks like this. Well, that didn't quite fit. And no, maybe if you do this, right? And that's why it's important to discover yourself and understand yourself and like learn about yourself so that you can define for the other person, like, this is what it takes for me to feel loved and for me to feel wanted. So if that happens, it's not necessarily that the person is abusive, but if it's happening
Right.
consistently, right? And if it's happening to control you, then the whole point, the whole root of domestic violence is control and power, right? And so I just want to throw that tidbit out there because I think some people do that innocently because they don't know what they like or what they don't need. And other people do
Mhm.
it intentionally because they want to feel like they have control, because they want to feel like they have the upper hand in the relationship.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point because it can happen and look in different ways. And it also, I think what you could look at would be, and is it happening in multiple areas of life? Like my
Mhm.
boyfriend is an amazing cook, and so like he does like move that goalpost so I can get a little bit better. He's like, maybe don't burn it. I'm like, oh, cool, cool, cool.
Yeah. Mhm.
But he doesn't do that in other areas. He just like literally like he's like, well, I wish you would be as good of a cook as me so you could do it sometimes. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
that's fair.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, um, one thing that I like to highlight that a lot of people don't even look at is sometimes domestic violence has been so normalized in your life
Mm,
that you don't realize it in a romantic relationship because you may have grown up that way or you had a parent that was very controlling, maybe not necessarily overtly abusive, but didn't really give you choices, didn't give you a lot of, power over yourself. And so
mm.
it becomes a little bit easier for someone that has power for you to like someone that is familiar because that's what we're normally attracted to is what's familiar. So can you give a little bit about that maybe in did that play out in your life?
Um, for me, it didn't play out in a large way. But but I've seen it very commonly happen with a lot of people. And what I'll see is that a person will be talking about either like childhood things or partner things. And then eventually it's like, oh, this is also like that. Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I think it's always helpful to analyze all your relationships and even friendships and even workplace relationships.
Yep.
Like knowing yourself and being able to like know what your boundaries are and set those and know when to make them flexible, which sometimes you need to do in a workplace relationship or other relationships, but like
Mhm.
knowing where those are, I think can be really helpful. And then, yeah, just looking at all your relationships and then seeing what you can learn from other
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah. And I don't think that people like tie the two and understand because like the brain, I'm very big on teaching about how the brain works because it's so important. Your brain is just like literally a computer. All it knows to do is
Mhm.
store and connect, store and connect, store and connect.
Mhm.
So sometimes we're drawn to the things that your brain is just familiar with. And it's like, oh, maybe my parent was this way and that means love because they were my parent. They love me. And so, maybe this is what love looks like, And so you're attracted to somebody like that, and then you don't realize it until somebody brings it to your attention and it's just like, hey, that may not be healthy, right? That may not be safe, or until you're losing sleep, or until it
Yeah.
gets physical, right?
Mhm. Yeah. I think what's also helpful with like going from that would be looking at like the differences between anxiety and excitement. Like we're going to get cortisol regardless, and we're going to get
Hmm.
oxytocin when we have feelings of love. But is it coming with cortisol that is from anxiety, or is it coming from excitement? So, like, really getting to know your feelings and what they are. And then
Hmm.
also, our memories are going to be stored in our brainstem, and our brainstem is connected. Like, it's all connected, but anyways, it's sort of connected to our gut. And so, if you can listen to your gut, that's where
Hmm.
it's just like that part of our brain and that part of our body that doesn't have words because it hasn't been processed into our frontal cortex. So we want to think about things that we're seeing, but also listen to our bodies, and that will give you the clues of
Yes.
what is safe.
Yes, I think you're the first person that I've interviewed that has talked about the body in response to certain things. Because us in the Western culture, we're not very big on listening to our bodies. We're more push it through, work hard to the bone culture, and pull your bootstraps up,
Oh,
and whatever other stuff.
yes, it's so bad. It's so bad.
Yeah, it's terrible. And then we wonder why America leads in like depression and anxiety and mental health, right? Because we are not a culture that values rest. We're not a culture that values like taking care of your needs. We're a culture that values productivity and achievement, right? And so your body knows when to tell you something when something is wrong. Like if you think about it, your caveman brain, that's what I call it, only knows how to survive, right? And
Mhm.
so it's constantly at the lookout for survival. And so when you have that gut feeling, it's because, something isn't right here. And it could be misled if you've been through a lot of trauma, right? It could be that you're hyper aware of things, right? But
Mhm.
a lot of the time, that gut feeling, your instinct is real. It's like you're an instinctive creature before you're a logical creature, honestly.
Yes.
And your
Yeah.
body will tell on you when you're mad, whether you start moving, messing with your hands, or clenching your jaw, your body will tell you that you are experiencing an emotion without before your brain can process that.
Yes, and especially when it's something that is even mildly triggering, or actually, I'm trying to use activating instead. I think it's a kinder
Mhm.
language. My therapist taught me that. I'm like, oh, I like that. Yeah, experiencing something even mildly activating, if your brain doesn't have the capacity to process it, especially if it's connected to a previous activating time, then it won't process into the frontal cortex where we can look at things. It will
Mhm.
stay in the amygdala and even the brainstem if it's really, really deep. And then we don't have the words. And so that's where we have to listen to our bodies.
I love it. I love it. So when we talk about domestic violence, like, you were in it. You didn't recognize that it was happening. Let's talk about those subtleties that we tend not to look at with how they interact with other people. Because you mentioned that.
Mm, yeah. Well, I feel like, okay, one thing kind of on this. Yes, ADHD, my brain like goes in all the places.
It's all connected.
Connected always, yes. But he like did not like any of my friends, did not like me to be on the phone with my friends. We ended up moving out of state, which was like partially because of work, but also it's like that's also a thing that can happen is isolation, right? So regardless if we
Mhm,
were in the same state or not, but like him not liking my friends then made it so I could not feel safe to talk with him about the
mhm,
things he was doing and saying when I
mhm,
should have been doing that. Not, I hate the word should have, scratch that, but I wish I would have been doing that at the beginning,
mhm,
because then maybe I wouldn't have, been in that relationship that long. Um, and I think also in like other people, he talked crap about people, right? He wasn't
mhm,
seeing good in others, and
mhm,
oh, I like how you can see the good in everybody. Like, yes,
mhm.
why can you not do that? Like, and not everybody can do that, not everybody should do that. Like, that's just something I do, but it was a stark contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So isolation is one of the big key things, right? And
Mhm.
in my instance, I think he didn't have many friends, which some people don't have a lot of friends because their personality is just like, I'm more chill. I have my two or three and I'm okay, right? But when
Mhm.
you don't have many friends that stick around, there may be an indication that, hey, this person doesn't value relationship, or this person doesn't have what it takes to sustain a relationship, right? If
Right.
you are in a relationship with someone who does not value people, it doesn't change just because it's romantic. And I think a lot of the time we have that mentality of, oh, it's different with me. Oh, it's different with me, until it's not, right? Until it's not. Because a person, when they're practicing a habit, it's just their habit. And it doesn't, there are no lines, because you're practicing when you make it normal with everybody else. It's only a matter of time before it becomes your normal, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
And
neural pathways get strengthened with each behavior, each time you do it.
yeah, and so when you were in that and it was a slow, did can you talk about the verbiage that was used to get you to stay or to get you to not talk to your friends?
Um, I'm like, oh, I could pull up like quotes from the book.
Do it.
But but just things like, oh no, I want you to like be spending time with me when I'm home and I'm off work. I want you to be with me. And so it
Mhm,
wasn't even like smack talking at that point. It was just like,
mhm.
oh, he really values me being with him.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's subtle though, because I can almost guarantee you that when you did do that, he still didn't really spend time with you in the way that you wanted to.
He was playing video games. Yeah.
Right. Right. So it's not a problem until you want time for yourself, right? So it was all about just control. It wasn't even about like, I want to spend time with you. So those are the small subtle things. And when it's just like, oh well, it would really hurt me, or it I would prefer you because I just want you here, right? And again,
Yeah.
some people, their
Yeah.
homebodies, or
It's
they're
whatever.
more,
Oh, I think your
their
foot is sore. Hold on.
personality
Let me
is
get my
more
quotes in.
for not having too many people in their personal space. But again, it's about that control. What are their actions? What are their behaviors looking like when they tell you to do these things? And are they actually being intentional about spending time with you or doing something else? Really acknowledging their behaviors, because it's subtle. It looks like
Yeah.
that. It looks like, oh, even when you call your family and friends, I don't know why you're talking to them anyways. They don't care about you.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't have time for them. You just have time for me. And let's go do this. And what about making our new friends in our new place that we're living?
Mhm.
But those
It's not a
deeper.
problem until you go out of your way to establish some independence from the relationship. That's what I would like to highlight.
Yes, yes, because if a person is finding independence from the relationship, the other person's not okay with it, then you are moving outside of their control, and they don't
Mhm.
like it. And that can also be when it gets worse, too, is when they start to notice that when a person is starting to think about leaving.
Hmm.
that is actually the most dangerous time. That's when homicides occur. So I also want to point that out is that, like,
Hmm.
clearly, I hope that people get out of relationships that are not safe, but we
Hmm.
have to do it really, really safely. And there is on the National Domestic Violence Hotline, you can go to their website and click safety plan, and it can guide you through all the different ways and things to think about. And you can easily exit out of that website. You can call or text for support there.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, when you start to find your own control and power again, is when they tend to get really scared and act out worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Or two, another one is when they're getting exposed or about to get exposed,
Mm, yes.
right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Part of, in my experience, it was like my family was coming to visit and he was like, you better not tell them anything that's been happening. And I'm like, what? But then I was like scared about how he would react in front of my family, which
Hmm.
in hindsight, that would probably would have been better because it probably would have moved things along faster.
But let's
But
talk about why people don't, right? Because it's the embarrassment, right, that comes
Mhm.
along with if I admit there's something wrong here, right? I look foolish. It's my marriage. I don't want it to fall apart. There's like a stigma related to the shame of
Yeah.
like having a failed marriage, right? So,
Yeah.
I don't think people talk about or understand the vulnerabilities of when someone is in it, what it looks like how much courage it takes just to even admit and speak out and to reach out.
Right. Right. It takes a lot of courage to be able to say, okay, I'm going to not think about the stigma because it's just pervasive in our society. And even personally, my two parents are happily remarried for almost around 20 years each at this point. So they were already happily remarried. I didn't have
Hmm.
that, like, oh, must stay together because my parents, I knew they could,
Hmm.
but it's still a culturally pervasive stigma. And oh shit, I was gonna say something else on that. Um, oh, and then also because of the psychological abuse that is happening, where it's like we have to stay together. You made a promise to me. Those things get like said in the good times, and it gets mixed
Hmm.
in, or like the passive aggressive, like, oh, like so happy we're still together, like, oh, you're always going to be here for me. And it's like, wait, am
Or
I?
you'll never find someone that loves you the way I love you,
Yes.
right? Nobody wants you apart from me. You could be the
Yes.
most beautiful person in the world. you
Yeah.
know, Go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I guess it's all just ways to make them feel like you aren't going to leave.
Hmm.
And in a healthy relationship, then like we can look at codependent versus like interdependent. So in an interdependent, healthy relationship, you can love the person and know that you want to be with them, but also that like you will survive if something happens. It will
Hmm.
be okay. You'll both get through it.
Hmm.
And yeah, you can still, but you're choosing to be with that person. It's
Hmm.
not, yeah, I guess that's the part to clarify. It's not that I can't not be with this person, but I'm choosing this person every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would like to highlight, like what you said earlier, too, that, it impacts your self esteem. And I just want to
Hmm.
highlight for people that have that stress response of fawn, which is pleasing, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can never love someone into loving you. You can never love someone enough. You can be the most perfect person. You can be the best. You can do it. But the problem is not you. And a lot of people, when your self esteem is affected in a domestic violence relationship, you're like, oh, I just need to be a better wife or a husband. I just need to do better things. I need to cook better. I need to be on my schedule. And let's not talk about also on the flip side of that when they say, well, if you didn't do this, I wouldn't react this way.
Oh, projection?
But blaming you for their
Yeah.
reactions, for their responses, for their immaturity. And it creates that cycle of, oh, well, I just need to do better. Well, I just need to do better. And maybe
Yes.
this won't happen. Things are going to get better if I just need to work harder.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that moving the goalposts in multiple areas of life to where you're feeling, or the person, the survivor is feeling, I need to be the best person that I can for this person so that they stay with me and because they need me. And then they'll sometimes go into like their own victim blaming as a form of manipulation of like, oh, but I need your help. Like you promised to be there with me. Like
Hmm.
a partner should stay by a person's side to be there for them when they're going through this hard time of hurting you.
Hmm.
But it all gets manipulated into that. And then I think too, when a person does start to doubt, like, is this safe? Do I want to be in this? Then there's also a bit of like your own victim blaming in your own head that goes into like, why am I in this? Like, is this the only love I'm gonna have? And why did I choose this person? What if I choose the next person I choose is worse? Like,
Hmm.
it it happens doubly, and then you add the like just culture of, I mean, I don't know, I feel like it's probably a global thing, really. I don't know a country that I can think that wouldn't have this. So yes, like the global culture of like stay in your marriage. So we're like triply convinced to stay
Yeah.
and lowered
Yeah.
self-esteem.
And I want to highlight that it's not just emotional. I think we talked a lot about the emotional, the subtleties of the physical. I think some people think that it's straight like, oh, he's going to punch me or these things, or it's going to be very blatantly in my face.
Yeah.
But there are warning signs like prior to, even if you're dating, even if whatever. Some people have short fuses because they have short fuses. There's a difference between somebody being short tempered and somebody being explosive,
Mhm.
over the small things. But before it gets physical, I just want to educate a little bit about it's not, they don't punch you right away or strangle you right away. They don't do those things. It's things like blocking the door when you're trying to leave,
Mhm.
holding you back when you're trying to go somewhere, taking the phone if you're trying to talk to somebody, being invasive in your like social media, or you don't have any privacy because that is abusive, right?
Mhm.
When you're taking away someone's autonomy, which means their decision to choose for themselves, it starts there. It starts with pushing each other.
Mhm.
It's not just laying hands on each other, but also like slowly that push that becomes normalized, right? So if you don't set a boundary when somebody pushes you from the get go, you're establishing in that other person's head that it's okay and they're just going to take it when I do this.
And they're going to
You
see what
know?
else they can do. Yeah. I would also add violence to inanimate objects. Like you can see an
Yes.
explosive outburst at someone doing something to a car tire or a laptop, in my personal experiences, anyways. But like you see the explosive thing happening to an object, like this car tire is
Animals,
not going to get hurt.
children.
That's for sure, for sure. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Watch out for that.
Hmm.
Even with inanimate ones, like just watch carefully to see if like, is that a proper, like, is that a healthy response? How
Hmm.
else might they explode if you,
Yeah, towards,
yeah,
if it's towards everything, right? Because some people, it is healthy, like go punch a punching bag. Some people need to get it out, go run,
sure,
whatever, right?
yeah,
Like, but if
yeah,
it's
yeah,
consistent,
those are good.
right? The key here is, do they know how to regulate their emotions? That is,
Yes.
I think that's what the key is, because some people, again, they may be physical. They may just need to get it out and it'll just be towards something else and then come right back and like, okay, I'm fine, but do they have that self-control to get themselves out of that situation where people are there, where whatever's happening, and it's not just reactive all the time. It boils down to having that self-control. And I like how you mentioned the inanimate objects. I didn't even think to mention that. But in my situation, I saw it with like we had dogs, very aggressive towards the dog, right? Like I wouldn't say like overtly abusive, or the dog was like had broken bones or anything like that, but it was just like the way they talked to the dog, the way they punished the dog for doing the things, you know. And I can't imagine, looking back now, I'm like, well, how would you treat a kid? Right. And some people, again, they think, oh, not this line. They won't cross this line. Right.
But the more lines that they cross, the more they'll keep crossing because they want to just see what else they can get away with. That's
Hmm.
part of all of it for them. Yeah.
And I think it's sad because you and I both know that, as therapists, like we talk about the victims also, but we don't talk a lot about how the abuser also went through probably their own abuse or their own crazy experiences that have led them to be this way. And it's not making excuses for them, but it could be learned behavior or extreme like responses to negative events that have happened to them. And they just learned that if I'm this way, I have control. I need to have control. Right. And again, it's power and control and it's rooted somewhere. But this is why it's so important to analyze like someone's background. Not to say that people that went through things are all bad, but how are they dealing with those things? Right? How do they interact with friends? How do they interact with family? Do they
Yeah.
treat their mama well? Their dad well, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's all like yes, everything's all connected, but yeah, it's all connected. Like, how are they treating other people? And I find too that people can use their stories of their traumas or their childhoods as ways to be like, oh, feel sorry for me, connect with
yes.
me.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you don't want to hold that against them.
Mm-hmm.
However, a person can have gone through something bad. You can hold space for them
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have to be with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of the above can be true. And also, this is connected back to self regulating. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, how are they talking about it? Are they able to regulate their emotions while talking about it? Do they need professional help? Will they go get professional help? Like, how are they dealing with it? I feel like can give you a clue.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And again, people just because you've been through stuff doesn't mean you're bad. It's how are you managing, right? And what did you learn, if anything, right? And so let's fast forward, right? You went through your relationship, you didn't know you're in it, you got help. So after you left, like, what did it look like to heal and rebuild? And you say you're in a relationship now, so like, give us like the in between details of what led to that. Was it scary? Was it like,
Um, yeah. Okay. Well, it's like 10 years. So let's see what happened in 10 years. Um, so yes, I called the National Domestic Violence Hotline. I went to the support groups. I went to get public legal help to get a restraining order, um, and went through. I was looking for a lawyer, and then he found one sooner than me. So then we went through the whole divorce process. Um, I got a therapist and worked through with them as well as still attending the support groups. I read a ton of books. I think the biggest one that had an effect on me was "Why Does He Do That" by Lundy Bancroft. And yes, please put genders aside because this happens to all genders, but that is what it's called and it is based that way. But it's really helpful information. Um, and I started writing my own memoir, my own process, which was quite hard. It was a lot of things have been dissociated since it happened during trauma, like I was talking about earlier. Like memories were not in the frontal cortex, and so I would pull the memories back and reprocess them with my narrative now of being a survivor. Yes, I did want to point that out too. Survivor, not victim.
Mm-hmm.
Place of empowerment. Yeah, so I went through that process of writing and then had to find out what my next job was going to be and went through like a bunch of self exploration through that. Um, yeah, I worked at YMCA and volunteered for Bernie Sanders, and I was like, okay, like what things are important to me? What am I going to do while I'm
Yeah,
like
rediscovering the
unemployed?
self, right? That you've
Yes.
lost through the journey of going through domestic violence. There is such a loss of self that people don't realize because it becomes about the other person and there's
Yeah.
no space for you.
Right, so much. So I literally had like forgotten so many aspects. Like my mom gave me this big crate of like childhood things, and I was like,
Mm.
oh my God, I was good at drawing. I didn't know that. Okay. You know,
Mhm.
cool. Let
Yeah.
me start drawing again. And so, yeah, a lot of just who who am I, who I've always been, and like how am I changed now, and what have I learned, and how do I not do that?
Mhm.
So yeah, so I dated a whole bunch, and yeah, then decided where like what kind of degree I wanted to get for. So
Mhm.
decided, okay, I'm going to become a therapist. I'm going to do mental health counseling. Um, apply to schools the first year just in my city and did not get in.
Mm.
And then the next year applied to schools wherever I had friends that lived across the country. Uh,
Yeah.
so I oddly ended up moving from Seattle to Florida in 2020 to go to graduate school. And 2 weeks before moving to Florida, I literally on the street ran into a boyfriend that I dated in 2006, the day
Wow.
before.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah. So then we did some long distance and he ended up coming to Florida. And now we're back in Seattle and 3.5 years together. Happy.
That is so awesome. So you got to rebuild by reconnecting with yourself, right? And I think that's so important because there was a while I think for myself too when I went through my situation where I was like, dang, like I don't do the things that I loved. I forgot about the things that drove me, right? And what filled my heart. Things like art, like you said, singing, music, those are the things that I was just like, that's how I knew. Like I used to love reading adventure and like diving into books. I'm like, man, I haven't picked up a book in years, right? Um,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
rediscovery journey and then the healing. When you truly heal, I always tell people, not just as a therapist, but in general, be careful who you think you are may not be who you are when you're healed,
Mm,
because sometimes the way we act or our needs or the things that we think we want are coming from a place that has pain. And when you heal from that pain, those needs may change, right? And going through that journey of like finding yourself. And did you ever, I remember, I remember for myself, like when I started dating seriously again, I was like, I don't even trust myself. I
I
don't even
mean,
trust my ability to make this choice. And I'm remarried, by the way.
um, yeah, a little, but I had learned so much about what domestic violence looks like from New Beginnings, and I took avid notes. I have like a whole journal full of notes that I still have. And so like there's so much information out there if you go look for it. It's just not like so readily available as I wish it was.
Hmm.
Um, but having that helped me feel like, okay, I know what to look for. I'm like very familiar with these behaviors on the power and control wheel. Going through the process of writing my book and actually the hardest part to write was the quote unquote good parts. Um,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
I had like, I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like, I'm supposed to write some good parts in this book so people don't just read all trauma, the entire book.
Yeah.
But even as I went through looking at those quote unquote good parts, that's where I started finding the emotional abuse in my memories. I was
Hmm.
like, oh.
Yeah.
So it was going back to and at that point I also still kind of saw it as like my past self, even though it was like maybe a couple of years removed. But going back to that past self in that relationship to look at it from a new lens and create my new
Mhm.
narrative, and also my current self, who am I now, and what do I know about what is safe, and I need to listen to my body.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. It was funny because even when I work for child services, so you learn about all this stuff, right?
Mm.
Like, these are the things to look for because you investigate cases that are about domestic violence. You investigate all of the things, right? And it was funny because when I learned, I was like, oh man, I wish I would have learned these things, prior to and before. But even
Mhm.
when I knew, like, and it's funny you said listen to your gut. Like when I met my husband, I was like, oh, I don't trust myself, that anxiety, right? Because of like what happened before and you're activated, right? But then something about him was like, I felt grounded. And people were like, what do you like about him? I was like, I don't know. He's like a rock,
Yeah.
like, I don't know how to describe it. And I didn't know then what I know now, but I know that I was describing, I feel safe, you know,
Yes.
I don't get butterflies when I see him, but I feel grounded and I feel safe, you know?
Yeah.
And I think I killed the butterflies long before I met him because I didn't want to allow myself to feel those things, right? But
Yeah.
I didn't know that I was describing safety. It's like, yes, he makes me feel safe. And it's just so beautiful, like the journey that you walk through of learning who am I after the chaos, right? Like
Mhm.
who am I after these things? And that I can learn and find something good, and
Yeah.
knowing all the lies that the other person told you. I am good. I am worth loving. I
Yes.
am worthy, right?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, and that was part of my journey too, was I would take all these things, like these things he had told me I was basically like bad at like everything in life. Like, okay, I can't
Hmm.
cook. Now, I am not as good of a cook as my boyfriend, but I actually can cook. But my ex would have had me to believe that I couldn't cook at all.
Hmm.
I do burn things sometimes, but I'm not that bad, right? But there was like this like,
Hmm.
let me cook for my family, and they're
Hmm.
like, oh, this is great. Like, no, like, can we disprove him saying that? You're fine.
Hmm. Hmm.
So like challenging each of those like one at a time, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, I love it. Well, Kate, I really appreciate like your openness and sharing your story and everything that you learned in your journey. If you could tell the audience or give the audience a takeaway, from this whole thing, what would it be?
Oh, okay. There's a lot of takeaways. I think I would say, if you are in doubt in your safety in your relationship with someone, or of someone, if you're questioning it, um, check in with your heart and your gut. Look at the resources, the power and control wheel and the equality wheel, and just think about what is safe. And also know that a person could be safe and not abusive, and you're not in love with them. That also is true, and that's okay too.
Mhm.
But check in with all of your body and your cognitive resources. Um, Also, to like not judge people for staying, because I think that we very clearly articulated why people get into it and why people stay and how hard it is to leave.
Mhm.
Um, and if you know someone that's in it, to like, don't give up on them. And it might be hard to hear them
Mhm.
talking about it. Give them resources. There's so many resources on the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Um, and and there's specifically resources for LGBTQ folk, on PFLAG, like tons and tons of websites, links, and hotlines up there.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, let's just support and trust and validate one another's experiences and our own experiences.
Yes, I agree. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Kate, and everything that we've learned from you. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just also want to add, I do have all the the information, psychoeducation on healing from toxic relationships, domestic violence. It is all on my website if you want to go and learn more about that. And my books are there as well. And I am talking about it on TikTok. So if you watch any of the romance reality, I will be talking about warning signs there so you can learn along together.
Yes, I love it. Well, thank you, Kate, and you have a great one. And I really enjoyed having you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much.
If you like this episode, follow us for more mental health education and humor. Don't just learn about mental health, apply it by playing the game of your life. Create your free account for exclusive access to communities and a wealth of resources.